Thank you to our sponsors for supporting this episode of Troxel, ArcIT, NCARB, and Avail. We'll share more about them later on in the episode. Welcome to the Troxel Podcast. I'm Evan Troxel. This is the podcast where I have a conversation with guests from the architectural community and beyond to talk about the co-evolution of architecture and technology. In this episode, I welcome Theodoros Galanos. Theodoros works at the intersection of artificial intelligence and AEC, or another way to say it is that he works at the intersection of design and intelligence. He specializes in the development of computational design technologies for the built environment that seek to generate, extract, collect, and articulate design intelligence, bring together disciplines, and enable effective, efficient, and most of all, creative design processes. How? Using language. He's a senior researcher in the City Intelligence Lab of the Austrian Institute of Technology, where he leads the development of Infrared, the first AI-driven performance-based urban design tool, and he's also the co-founder of ArchiText. ArchiText is the world's first semantic generation platform for architecture. Using nothing more than plain language, users are able to generate a rich variety of residential floor plans, which you might imagine could open up the world of architectural design to pretty much anyone. ArchiText uses state-of-the-art language models, specifically fine-tuned for this task, to quickly generate functional designs. Generated layouts can then be saved to all the popular design formats, allowing them to simply integrate into existing workflows using products like Rhino and Revit or AutoCAD. In this episode, we talk a lot about AI as it relates to architectural design using written language. More specifically, how his ArchiText tool is beginning by generating residential floor plan layouts now and where it may go in the future. We also talk about this in the context of democratizing design, how he trained the language model, what biases and gaps potentially exist in the data used for the training, the vision of end-to-end design workflows, what this could mean for the future of the architectural profession, how he got started down this path, the notion of AI as oracles, deep learning models, and so much more. This was a really interesting conversation, to say the least, so without further ado, I bring you Theodoros Galanos. Theodoros, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Ivan. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so let's see. We definitely want to get into what you're doing at ArchiText. I can't wait to get to that part of the conversation. And so maybe you can provide a little bit of background before we jump into the topic at hand, and just tell everybody who's listening, how did you get to where you are, and basically what you've been up to?
Sure. So my road to here has been a bit, let's say, I'm not sure if it's traditional or not. So for me, it was a bit not traditional. So I started studying mechanical engineering, and surprisingly back then, many years ago, back when I was in uni, a lot of our courses were about what today are important parts of AI, but none of us realized it. So we all became mechanical engineers, and I never really applied it. I went around things. I did a master in environmental sustainability, so they used to call it industrial ecology back then. Now I think it's circular economy. And, I tried to find my way, and I never managed. And at some point, in a very contingent manner, I left everything I was doing in Europe, and I came to Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, where I am now. And it is here that I found my calling. It was here that I found my calling about 8 years ago. And I got into the environmental design and engineering work. And I started like everyone else, I imagine. Like I remember my first day. I was looking at some drawings, trying to find, some things they asked me to find. Are they there, like requirements? And I was doing Excel spreadsheet, right? This was my first day. And I had a lot to learn. And it was really exciting. I really dived into it. I started doing some performance-based stuff, and I still realized that we were doing a lot of, analytical methods, like a lot of Excel spreadsheets other people have brought. And I started asking myself, okay, can we do this a bit better? So slowly I went into the computational design community. That's what I became. I became a computational environmental designer, I like to call myself. And a lot of Ladybug tools. I was everywhere in the forums asking, the most, let's say, newbies questions you can ask, right? That's how we learn. And after a couple of years, again, because I dived into it, I was pretty good at it. So, I started answering similar questions for other users that came into the domain. I got involved in the community. Meanwhile, at work, I did a lot of research and development. I was very lucky I had the space to search. So we created, new workflows, new tools, even, with Mustafa, we tried to make Butterfly and a lot of new ideas. But at some point, I was doing a bit more complex studies about environmental design, mainly thermal comfort and especially in the urban environment. And I was very disappointed by my work because a lot of the things that I had to do took literally weeks to be done. And at the end of the day, there was never time to do a proper presentation. And anyways, it was just one slide in a presentation to the client. And I was disappointed because I knew that these things that I was doing could have impact in the design. Like I knew that if we did them seriously, we looked at the results and then we went back to improve, we could have like real, tangible impact in the world. But that couldn't happen. So at that point, I quit. I quit my job, and I thought, okay, how can I change? How can I change what I'm doing? How can we do things better? How can we move design forward? And that's where I thought, machine learning and AI could be it. And I was actually doing, for a couple of years in my work, some machine learning workflows. And I had this idea that became Infrared, which is the tool that we've been developing the last 3 years alongside ArchiText, let's say. Maybe we can predict a lot of things. We can use AI models as oracles, we call them, and we can avoid all this costly simulation. So that was the first step, the first interaction with AI in design for me. And the first thing that I tried to attack, and I always do like this, I find problems, was how can I attack this problem of it's very hard, very costly, and very time consuming to do anything that matters, right? Any metric that really matters is really hard to do. It's very easy. Okay. If you have the data, it's easy to do costing, for example. You can do the calculation very fast. But all the other things that really matter in environmental design are very difficult. So I attacked this and it worked. It was really successful. And then I started thinking, okay, I started drafting a wider vision for AI in design, and I call that sort of it's not a very new term, but I like to call it design intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. And in that vision, there is a lot of blocks and modules, and it's a hierarchical system in my mind. And predicting was one of these things. So the next thing that I tried to do was, okay, now that I have something that predicts, maybe I can find a generator. Maybe I can go back to generative design, something very popular in our domain, and do it properly. And what I mean by properly is do it again on metrics that matter, and not just, move around some shape and see what comes out. So I applied that idea of prediction to that, and it was also quite successful. I haven't brought that to the end. It's a very nice methodology, but that was the idea. I started picking out little spots of that vision. We can talk about that vision later of end-to-end design intelligence workflows, and we can also talk what I mean by end-to-end later. And that's how ArchiText came to be, because in that sketch that I had, one of the points was, I call them initiator and code. The names are a bit opaque, but what they mean is how do you put constraints into a system like that? And how do you put your goals and your metrics and what you want to do? Essentially, how does the human designer input everything they want to do and they have to do into the system? And I thought this was easy. I thought, okay, maybe a UI thing, right? We can figure out some cool UI and they can put all this stuff. But it turns out it was the hardest thing you can ever do in an open-ended workflow like that, because there are arbitrary constraints. You can have millions of them. I can make the best UI, and then the next day someone comes and adds something new and everything breaks apart, right? So that's where ArchiText came. That's where I realized, okay, what if we can use language. Language is a very, very nice way of expressing arbitrary, not just constraints, everything, right? You can express everything with language. And in that everything, you can also express constraints. You can say, for example, I want this design to have good daylight, to be average cost. And, to have like this number of rooms, right? These specific rooms. Or you can say anything you want. And the cool thing about this is another aspect of my work that is very important. It democratizes design. Language democratizes design because someone like me, who was not trained as a designer, can use this to design. Because I do have the words to sort of speak to such a machine, right? I do have the words to express what I want. So that's another big important part of AI in design, I think, democratization, removing these barriers of, things that are very difficult to do and require expertise. And of course, the expertise will always be needed. Like someone that is an expert will use the system in a much better capacity than me, right? And they will embed their creativity and knowledge into it. But that doesn't mean that, it has to be gated to someone who has that creativity, knowledge, and expertise. So that's where architects came to be. It was, again, all these were gambles, let's say. And I never expected it would work. The idea was, I was doing some experiments with a model called DALL-E back then. So I was creating from language images. This is very popular nowadays. All these clip workflows, if you heard, and, AI art being created by language. It's very popular. So I was doing that. And then I realized there's a bit, what if we can take the image away? Why we can deal just with language? And that's how architects came to be, and it works. It works of course, the current example is limited. Yeah, okay, of course, it's the first implementation of it. But what I try to tell to people when they do say this, that, hey, this is a bit limited, I try to say something new, it can't generate it, is that the method is general enough to deal with anything because it's language. And that's what excites me. That is, it's so general that we could potentially apply it everywhere.
You talk about language as like an input, and on your website, it's using text. Now, it sounds to me, though, like you're talking about just pure audio, voice kind of type of input.
In the AI domain, so language is always, it's meant to be as text. Yeah, so this is the confusion here, I guess. So when I say language, it comes from the language modeling domain, and it's always text, yeah. Then the sound, you can use voice. And of course, voice is a part of what I was saying. It can also remove barriers, right? Not everyone maybe could write or express their thoughts. So it's important to have it. But I think is a technical implementation, and it's not the power behind it. The power behind this whole method is language in the sense of language, in the sense of text. And we have a lot of text in the world. We have a lot of voice, and people are doing this with speech models now. It's just not there yet. Speech has a bit. The issues with speech are a bit more tricky.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of the first Star Trek-y episode yet, where on Star Trek, when you talk to the computer, you just talk to the computer. They rarely are typing anything into when they're interfacing with the computer. So thinking about language as the UI is a very interesting concept. And I think one thing that I think about when I think about language as UI is Google. Me growing up as the internet was created, I was trained to search for keywords. And I still very much think that way. And I think that's actually a downside because now it seems to me like the queries are very much based on natural language, much more so than they ever were before. So now, instead of just searching for keywords, you're probably more likely to find the answer you're looking for faster if you ask Google a question. If you type it out, obviously. But I thought that was such an interesting thing because I still don't naturally think like that when I approach searching for something on the internet, let alone when I think of using this as a tool to invoke design.
Yeah, that's a very good point because I think that's a very good example because natural language will be much more open-ended. So I would imagine in Google you will get results that you like, but also a big variety of results.
Well, if you think about it, most people ask questions. naturally. That we don't all think the same keywords naturally when we think about a topic. If I were to throw one topic out, you might think of different keywords than I would. And so, but we might ask the exact same question. So I think like when you think about training the model based on what is actually going on in the world, most people are just simply asking questions because that's the most natural form of a query they can come up with.
And the important thing is that while the keywords, like we said, might give you more specific results, like the expertise required to know them, not everyone will know that. And it's a nice example. I think I like it. I never thought of it before. And it's interesting to go and test it as well. Like, try an open-ended question and then try a question with specific keywords. I'm sure like the specificity will be different, but, both can work. And right now, in fact, I would say ArchiText, it's at a more specific level because that's an interesting thing. Like I've had a lot of people use it and I've seen that, especially I don't record any of that, no, but I see when they share it, right? So it's much more open-ended than intended, of course, right? Because the site also says, use natural language to design. And of course, the data set is much more constrained right now. It's at the level of keywords in a way. But the language model can handle any word. There's no problem because it's pre-trained on the whole English language, right? So it will handle it, but of course the output sometimes or most of the times won't be what you wanted. So if you put people put, a large villa with a pool and, a big balcony, and none of that is in the training set, right? Because it's a narrow domain still. It will still generate something. And the interesting thing, I saw someone on Twitter who shared, I think they put I forget, I can find the tweet later, and they sort of rationalized it. The architects, of course, made something of what it knows. It can do out of distribution, like different designs, but it can really do like villas, right? And it's 2D. And then they went maybe it was trained in Toronto, and they showed some Toronto towers and how it looked very similar, And that was an interesting sort of interaction with the UI. But yeah, that's one thing that is going to be very, very interesting, and it's actually a huge area of research right now. And perhaps, I don't like these words, but a profession of the future, right? I don't like to use that too much, but I think it is a future profession, this idea of interacting with language models. And it's a huge research domain, and it will be very interesting to see how designers, and in general, people in the AC, interact with these tools and what we can learn.
When I think about the interface with computers, obviously voice has come a lot more into it in the past decade or maybe less with the devices that we have around our house. People could have a Google device, an Amazon device, an Apple device, and they all have various commands that they'll accept. And one of the things I mentioned to you before we sat down to actually record this was how a lot of people complain about these devices because they don't understand what I'm asking. And yet, each one of them, I would say that there's some that are more successful than others. So when I ask my Amazon Echo a question, usually the percentage that it gets the answer that I'm looking for correct is much higher than when I ask my iPhone with Siri. But it kind of comes down to semantics. They are both kind of expecting you to ask it in the way that they expect it. And that's gotten better over time. So kind of like the output that you're giving now is obviously going to get better over time as well. And they learn from people asking questions the way that they're asking them, but they have to get kind of trained or programmed with, it has to start somewhere. So it's interesting to see, and I guess the complaints are probably just coming from really high expectations because of science fiction, right? Because of Star Wars or Star Trek. Because it's like, computer, what's the answer to, search the entire database of human history and give me the answer in a second. I mean, this is we're not there yet, but it's really interesting times to think about. There was a conference that I went to a couple of years ago, and one of the questions posed was, if you had a helper sitting on your desk that was like a voice activated helper, like an Echo Dot that actually could help you during the design process, what would you ask it? And so now, like seeing what you're building, that's kind of, this is probably the first thing I've actually seen that starts to be an answer to that. I know like Nathan Miller at Proving Ground a few years ago was looking at Microsoft's Cortana as an interface into Power BI to be able to ask it questions about a data set presented in the dashboard, which is interesting as well. But these are kind of the first inklings we're actually seeing where voice text query or commands are doing something in the field of architecture.
Yeah, I think it's exciting. Like, and I would say, like, on the company, like, we're not there yet. I would say that there are timelines, right? Everyone in AI has timelines. Where are we? Where is AGI? Like, my timelines, I feel, are way shorter than most of the people in the architecture engineering community. Like, like when we discuss these things with people, they will say, yeah, this is good, but it's not very practical yet. And I like to tell them that it's way closer than you think. In fact, it's practical already. It just needs to be implemented in a way, in a workflow. So yeah, I think we are very close. Like, these tools are very close. And ArchiText is just an example of how close we are, because to me, like, when it worked, it was mind-blowing to do what you just described, like to say something with words and get a design output. It was kind of mind-blowing. I'd never seen it before. And this idea of querying the whole database of human, even there we are close. So for example, the clip model that OpenAI released a year ago almost, and sort of blew the doors on all these things, is almost that. It was trained in like 400 million images, right? So it doesn't have the whole human visual database, but it has a sliver, a big chunk of the human visual unconscious in there. And you can query it. You can ask it everything, right? Anything you want. And it sort of knows anything, you can sort of generate anything you want, like any crazy combination of visual semantics, language, or multimodal semantics. And that's incredible. That's what inspired me, in fact. And like you said, it will only get better. Like, for example, we can implement a sort of active learning. So if architects was somewhere, let's say if a company had something like architects, right? A way to create stuff, they would just interact with it and interact and interact and interact. And if they were smart, they would save every interaction. And if they were even smarter, they would make a UI that sort of like catalogs some sort of interaction, like some preference, right? Maybe the designer says, okay, this was terrible. What are you giving me, Or this was good. Or even, if we were even smarter, we would sort of like allow the designer to interact, interactively edit the results alongside. And then we go into this human-computer interaction that I envision in this design workflows, right? Where it's an interplay. It's an interplay of like, suggestion and correction. And every step in that process, which ideally would be fun and nice to do, right? It wouldn't be like, let's make this grasshopper definition for 5 hours so that we can... If it was fun, it would generate high-quality data, right? Because these human preferences are incredibly important in actually telling the model what to give you the next time you ask something, right?
Right.
So there is a sort of active learning. Of course, there are issues there in active learning, like learning through preferences, but this is a very important... It's in fact one of the next steps that I want to do. OpenAI did it again. Like, I think a few months ago, again, there is a very nice work called Reinforcement Learning with Human Feedback, RLHF. And what they did is they took GPT-3 and they just did, I forget what type of prompts, but they were just asking it for things, right? And GPT-3 was generating stuff. And then they had humans say, okay, this is not very good. What if you change this? And that feedback, they gave it to a reinforcement learning model, so another agent. And the agent learned how to guide the GPT-3 to better results, right? And this is a very nice approach. It's very cool. It's a bit costly because you actually need humans to do these things.
You have to babysit, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But at the work environment, if humans deploying something like that or anything like that, you might be able to reduce the costs by just letting people, interact with it. And of course, we didn't touch upon this a bit. It's much easier to reduce those costs if you really use these tools, because this design intelligence, AI and design tools, if you have them, you really need to use them in new ways. It can't be just, let's optimize what we've been doing. So the exploration I mentioned in the beginning, So truly exploring with powerful exploration methods your design space at the early stages of design, that will make this active learning, it will supercharge it, because then you're actually searching across hundreds of thousands, millions of alternatives and in new ways. So yeah, there are a lot of steps to it, but I think we're at a good position to change a lot of things.
I definitely want to talk more about your vision for it. But before we get there, I want to ask, how did you get it to the point where it is now? What did it take? How did you train it?
Yeah. So I think the hardest part, okay. So when I do some talks about this work in places, and I have this slide. I usually say it at the end, but it's very important. I usually tell to the audiences, usually architects or engineers, and I tell them you have as much to offer to AI as AI has to offer to you. And I say that because the hardest part of this work was the domain expertise. Right? So the hardest part was actually knowing what the problem is. And of course, having the knowledge to intersect with AI and understand, okay, what tool can I pull from there to help me solve it? But the problem, how to solve it, and generating the data for it, right? Generating instances of this problem or solution was the hardest part. So that was the first part for me as well. Like, okay, let's find the problem. Let's say, okay, of course, you select a simple example. Let's do residential apartments, which is not really simple. I think there is a lot of design in houses as opposed to offices. But and then having the expertise to generate data for that was important, and that has nothing to do with AI. And after that, it was just, as I said, it was a sort of like leap of faith. It had a very high chance of not working because most of these things don't work. I have a lot of ideas that didn't work, but it did. And the training part is not that difficult. So the idea was, you generate data. The data are in the form of geometry. And the big mental leap that I did, and this is kind of cool because I really don't like talking myself up, but I'm in like
do it.
I'm in AI communities, right? And the people there are way smarter than me, and they do like amazing work. And I've learned so much from them over the last year. And yet, this idea, none of them had it. Almost none. Like I've seen, for example, a paper from NVIDIA came 4 months after ArchiText. They do the same thing. Of course, it's not that I was the first one that had it, but wait, I was the first one that did it. Why? Because of the domain expertise, I think. NVIDIA they're incredible engineers, right? All their code is pristine, but they're not architects. They had to find something they could do, and they did it with furniture, which is another extension of ArchiText that I'm working on. So instead of making layouts, they took layouts and they positioned furniture inside in the same way with language. And so that was the big leap of faith. Was like, can we use language? I have these words when I was doing DALI of like generate images of designs. I had this idea of like design with language. So you type something and a design comes out. ArchiText is design as language, right? It's language as design. So that was the leap of faith. Can we just take away everything visual, for a second? Just imagine there's no images, or imagine the image in a semantic way. And can we train a model to generate that? And it can. And in fact, it's so powerful because it's, as I said, these models that I'm using, they are available online. This is the other incredible thing that we don't have in our industry. They're all open source, right? You can download them pre-trained on the whole English language, right? On 600 billion tokens, almost a trillion, almost like 300 billion words or something, right? And because of that, I realized very quickly that they had incredible, let's say, the capacity to go out of distribution. So ArchiText, if you keep using it, it will generate some really weird designs. For an architect, they will be like, hey, what's this? This is horrible. Why did you even make this, right? And they're right. No one will build this design. But for me, I'm so happy because it actually generates something out of distribution. And that tells me that if we increase and keep increasing the data set and the interactions of it, we can really make this method general enough to design anything, if it's already like going out of what it's seen. So that's a big advantage of how these models were pre-trained on everything in language.
Let's take a quick break to share more about our sponsors. ArchIT. I'm going to stick a review in this time. So here's a review from an actual customer of ArchiT. The team at ArchiT has been fantastic. After years of struggling with unsatisfactory workarounds, security breaches, slowdowns, and poor IT assistance, they're extremely pleased with ArchiT. The architecture firm of 40 employees with 2 offices is in great hands, and that was Zachary Goodman, who is a principal architect at CSDA Design Group. So, as business owners and architects, how often do we think about our IT provider? Typically, only when things go wrong. And for many of us, unfortunately, this happens too often, especially with the latest emphasis on remote work. I know that I've had to deal with my fair share of IT fire drills. Not pleasant. ArchiT, however, is a very different kind of company. They specialize in serving architecture, design, and engineering firms, and their goal is to help you use technology as a competitive advantage. This means that they understand your technology stack, and they won't waste your time and money learning how your tools work within your process. Combine that with industry-leading response times, proactive remote hardware management, and solid disaster recovery and backup solutions. That's something that everybody should be thinking of, honestly. And enterprise-grade security management. And yet, above all, these are just table stakes for a solid IT company. ArchiT goes a step further. They become your strategic partner when it comes to planning, budgeting, and integrating new technology into your business processes. So all of this sounds expensive, right? Nope, because ArchiT is highly specialized for our industry. Their pricing is on par, or in some cases even lower than other IT providers. ArchiT is transparent and even publishes the pricing right on their website. Speaking of their website, there's also something else you should check out when you're there, and that is their Design Under Influence blog and video series. Again, adding value to IT-type solutions across industry, all good stuff. So your business deserves a competent, responsive, and proactive IT partner. Reach out to my friends at ArchiT for a free consultation. So go to getarchit, that's GETARCHIT.com, arc like architecture in the middle, and click Work with Us. Let's talk about content. What is content? You're probably thinking Revit families. Well, yes, of course, but the reality is that you use dozens of applications in your workflows. How many file types and formats are you using and creating every week? Here's some of the usual suspects: CAD and modeling files like AutoCAD, Civil 3D, Rhino and Revit and SketchUp, visualization files like 3D Studio Max scenes and models, materials and assets, photos and imagery, including renderings, site context and snapshots, project information like spreadsheets and product cut sheets, URLs for your intranet and external websites, and even marketing assets like your PowerPoint decks and proposals. I wish it wasn't true, but this list just scratches the surface. You know what I'm talking about. We all deal with a lot of data, and this is the new problem. The good news is, if it's digital, Avail can handle it. Avail has seen more than 1,000 different file types in their platform. They've taken a very holistic approach to content management problems in the AEC market. Most of the time, someone in a firm is looking to solve a specific problem like Revit family storage, but the fact of the matter is that you should be solving for the longer term. Avail future-proofs your technology investment. Go to getavail.com today to learn more. NCARB's Analysis of Practice Study is your opportunity to shape the future of architecture. Participate in this industry-wide survey to share your experiences and insights from working in architecture, engineering, or construction. Your feedback will help guide changes to what being a licensed architect looks like and impact how architects collaborate with other professionals in the future. Whether you're an architect or you work with architects, NCARB wants to hear from you. Make sure your voice is heard. Contribute to the Analysis of Practice Study today. Sign up at ncarb.org/AOP. And now let's get back to our conversation. How do you distinguish the difference between what you're doing with AI and these other software platforms that are providing thousands of generative design outputs based on those really loose constraints that you mentioned earlier?
This is a very nice question, and you give me like a podium for my. I'm a person that is quite critical, right? I don't mean that I'm very annoying. I just like think things through a lot.
Okay.
That might be annoying sometimes. So I don't really think that the vast majority. I think that the vast majority of generative design in AC is not that creative at all, right? And there is a very easy heuristic that you can use to do that, right? You can take some behavioral dimension, whatever that is, right? Like performance of your design, or just take two axes that you care about. You generate a bunch of things with your method, like hundreds of thousands, and then you plot them there. I would be shocked if the vast majority of the cases, all these designs were clamped in some sort of line, right? So like you will never have like the method. I think the methods I made in Grasshopper, right? That generative design, I doubt any of them was like creative enough to cover the design space. Not at all. In fact, by definition almost, these methods like my Grasshopper definitions, by definition, were biased. Why were they biased? Because we have all the sliders and we narrow the ranges, right? We do like, let's do from here to here. Then we have our own design biases. We say, yeah, this is not very sensible. Let's lower it, I don't really want above 100 because it's too expensive. So everything is biased. And what happens there is, of course, we get a lot of valid designs, quote unquote. You can't see me, but I'm doing the air quotes. But we are losing a lot of creativity. And in fact, this is what inspired my second step after I had infrared, after we had infrared. So after I had the possibility to predict things. And infrared very soon this idea will be combined with ArchiText, because we can discuss that later. I thought of, okay, how can we do really, truly generative design, right? So I went to an AI domain called quality diversity. And I also have a paper on this. I know people see papers as something like, it's a research thing, but it's a very practical thing for me. Like, it's a tool. It's already ready to be used in AC. I hope to be the first to do it, but someone needs to do it, right? So quality diversity says, let's search. It's a powerful search algorithm, right? Let's do generative design in a way, but let's do it in a diverse way. So let's search all that area. How do you do that? You don't put any restrictions. In fact, there's an open-ended method that says, I first search for diversity, and I also have a quality. So the cost, material, like the time, the daylight performance, some metric that I want to optimize. But I don't restrict anything, right? So I used infrared. So I used one of these Oracle models with that. And we did do hundreds of thousands of, in that case, was urban designs. Okay, even that experiment was, of course, a toy experiment for a paper, but you can imagine master plans, for example, or layouts, right? And the coverage of the design space was really much higher. And that's what I understand as generative design with AI. I understand it can't just be like, sliders and combinatorial thing and run it. It has to be like a process of exploration. Why? Because one of the most profound things they found with this, and this is Ken Stanley. He's now in OpenAI. He used to be at Uber, and he's like a big exponent of this, and the first papers of novelty search and quality diversity. And what they said in their book, which is an amazing book, I can recommend it later, is that when we look to optimize something, right, we find good things, but we miss out a lot of great solutions, because some of the great solutions in a problem we can only find if we don't optimize for that problem, right? So if we optimize for that problem, we bias ourselves in a range of solutions and we miss out a lot of other things. And they found this experimentally, right? They found things, and I saw this even in my work. So some of the urban designs that were good, they had a lineage. I could trace their lineage, their parents, right? This is an evolutionary method. I could trace the lineage, and some of their parents in that lineage were in areas of design that were terrible, right? And those areas of design, by definition, we would have cut out in my Grasshopper work, right? I would have taken out, because even before I started exploring. So that's where I stand with generative design. I think we can do better. One, in really expanding the view in the design space, and I think AI can help us do that. And two, of course, the other problem with generative design is, like I said before, most of the metrics are not really important, right? And why? Because it's really hard to do hundreds of thousands of evaluations. Like, imagine my problem was, how can we do hundreds of thousands of thermal comfort evaluations in urban areas? Each of these would take me 3 weeks at my work. You can't really do that, right? So yeah, so that's where I stand. So I think ArchiText, in a way, so let's go back to ArchiText. is it the other advantage of a language model is that in itself, and if you know how to coax this out, in itself is a multiverse, right? It's really hard to explain. It's not just a world model. Like, it's not a model that captures the world of language. It's a multiverse of different worlds, right? Because of how language works. And it gives you that incredible, diverse and rich generative design for free. So you said before you only generate one. I can generate thousands if I want. In fact, I have generated, I think, close to 3 million outputs by now. And you can have multiple continuations for the same thing. You can have multiple continuations with different parameters to search that multiverse that is inside that language model. So in a way, like, it gives you all that generative design that is really difficult an engineering process to do in architecture for free. And that's also really amazing. So one of the next steps that I'm doing is I plan to use the ArchiText model as a generator, as the engine behind the process that will look very similar to what we do in architecture, like, evaluating the output, giving a score, going back, So it can be the engine. And that's really amazing because it's an engine that you can deploy anywhere. You don't need any software, no licenses, no fees, You don't need like cables and spaghetti definitions. Like, it's easy to use. I really like that. You will notice that about me.
Well, there's a huge advantage there, right? Like you said earlier, you don't have to even be an architect to use it at that point. And I think that's one of the interesting things about languages. And this is, you can see this in books, you can see it in movies, the written word especially is somebody can write a story and everybody can interpret that and visualize that with their own imagination in very different ways. Like you said, it's a multiverse of sorts in that way. So the training part of it, like you're talking about, seems incredibly important for adoption within a vertical, because the thing that you're talking about, I think, is kind of like, I had Daniel Davis on the podcast, and he wrote an article about how software in AEC is mostly horizontal. And so it kind of has this low-lying set of features that everybody uses at the expense of everybody's got to build their own features on top of that within their own vertical. This is kind of the same, right? Like, if residential is very different than commercial when it comes to the kinds of commands that you would give it and the kind of output that you would expect, I think. So are you I assume you're thinking about that kind of stuff as you move forward.
Yeah, sure. I think it's similar, but also different. Like, it's very similar because, as you said, it's focused on a vertical, right? So this is residential design. It's different in two ways. One, this is not an inherent limitation of the method. This is just because we are in early stages. So the method itself is absolutely general. So with architects, I can make residential layouts, I can make factories, I can make site layouts, I can make anything that I can describe with language. And I'm actually shocked people haven't done it in many other domains, although some are happening. Like, website layouts are happening, document layouts are happening, and all these things. So it's general enough to be applied anywhere. And the second reason why it can be general is because once we get it in deployment within practice, and we get varied data sets across domains, then we can just train it in the same way, the same model for all domains, and then it becomes general. And then we get even more interesting interactions between the domains that I can't wait to figure out. So in this way, it's different. The other difference, I think, is in the nature. I talk about this in when I present this work. And I have this slide about the blog post that Karpathy did. Karpathy is the chief AI scientist in Tesla now. And he's very famous researcher. And he had this blog post in 2017, which is it's quite prescient, right? And what he says is that, and I really don't like this 3.0, 4.0 classifications, but in this case, I use it. So he said that AI models are software 2.0. And I actually think they are. So, like, we shouldn't think of them in parallel to traditional software. They are not, right? The traditional software, like we said, it has licenses, it has installments, it has requirements to learn it, it has like everything. These programs are software in themselves. They are no longer models. I don't think of them as deep learning models or AI models. They are software. right? And ArchiText, is a software you can use on a web page, right? And they are software with great advantages. They can be, like we said, deployed everywhere. Yes, they can be applied on a vertical, but they don't need to. They can be applied on many different things, right? I've made game maps, for example, with ArchiText. And that freedom of this new idea of software, I think, will change a lot of things in architecture, especially and design in general, especially as design is embracing, say, more coding and development and software. I think that's a nice future to get to, right? Instead of all of us becoming developers that, work on top of these tools that Daniel is mentioning, right? Let's be Python or C# developers and make tools on top of Revit and Rhino. Instead of just doing that, we can also think of what if we make our own software? Mm-hmm. And what if that software is not even code, right? Mm-hmm. What if it is a flexible, a malleable thing that can help me create things? And I think that's a brilliant future. And yeah, it's a completely different paradigm, because if you see like software 1.0 is exactly what I used to do at my work every day. You have like some data and you have a program. Some things go in and you have a program, like I had Grasshopper back then, and then some things come out, right? My performance, my designs, all these things. While what ArchiText is doing in all these deep learning models is you have some data, so you have the designs, you have the performance, and you have like, some training like Python or whatever, some framework, and you put this in and the program comes out. So the software comes out. And it's really, you flip things on its head. I really like doing that. So yeah, there are similarities, but I think they are quite different also from the traditional software.
You talked about metrics that matter earlier. I'm wondering, what are the metrics to you that do matter when you're coming up with the outputs that are useful for people?
Yeah, so I'm an environmental designer, as I said, so obviously I'm biased, right? It's not a bad thing. Everyone can use their own things that they care. So like I deal with performance-based design, so most of the time at my work, at least before, this was, energy, daylighting, comfort, natural ventilation, thermal comfort, wind comfort, all these things. But later on, I realized that what I care is really occupant metrics, like how, because that's what matters, right? How does the space feel to the person inside? How does it make your work better? How does it make your life better? How does it make your psyche better? All these things. So these are the metrics that I care about. I care about everything that affects, essentially, and affect is a very nice word for it, the occupant, right? And there are a lot of things in that. Like, obviously, like I like the comfort metrics because they are very much ignored in design. I think I was the only one in the region here doing comfort anyways. But in general, I don't think many people are doing comfort in like most of their projects. It's kind of, and the reason I understand, it's quite difficult to do. Like it took me time to sort of master it. It takes a lot of time, it takes like specialized tools and, all these tricks. A lot of things can go wrong. And then you're in the middle of the project. Oh, what do I do now? I don't have any more days, And it's not easy, and that's why I want to sort of make it easier in a way. And that's why infrared makes it incredibly easier. For example, with infrared, you can do in 1 second thermal comfort. Anyways, but yeah, those are the ones that I care. I care about metrics that impact the occupant or people that are within the area of design. It can be urban design, there are pedestrians, right? And yeah, but of course that can be expanded in other things. And one of the nice things about the quality diversity I mentioned before, this exploration is that it keeps talking about behavioral dimensions. And this is like an evolutionary domain thing. But it's interesting to think the parallel in architecture. We don't usually think of behavioral dimension. We usually think of, we have some inputs, right? We have like meters, width and height, and where the window is and what material. But we don't have behavioral dimensions. And we usually guide our designs through these other metrics of like very standard sliders, but I'm trying my workflows now to guide the designs with behavioral dimensions. So the behavior will be how does the design behave? And in a sense, how does it behave with respect to the human, right? So imagine guiding your design by thermal comfort. So imagine moving the slider of comfort and then changing the design. So this is again flipping the whole thing on its head. Instead of moving the window left or right to see how it affects comfort, I am moving comfort to a higher performance, and I want to see how that affects the design. So this is incredible if you can do it, and we can do it with AI.
Yeah, that's kind of a one-to-many kind of a ratio, right? Like you're thinking about comfort, but comfort really encapsulates many different facets, and different people might even have different definitions of what comfort is.
And we go back to the multiverse idea, because the same way as language models are a multiverse of language, the same way every single design space is a multiverse in itself, right? There are multiple brilliant designs at the specific area of those behavioral dimensions. So if I want a design with very good thermal comfort, there should be thousands of designs that satisfy this, right? So it's always a multiverse. And having access to that's a really big part of the design intensive workflow that I think of.
So right now, the tool can do 2D layouts, as you call it. And I know that you're talking about kind of this floor plan looking output, and you also have, I assume, ideas about the things that you're talking about as far as thermal comfort, daylighting, hours, sun hours, things like that. What is your vision for where you see this going? You said your timelines are shorter than what people think they are. So like, give us an idea of where you see this being able to go and when.
Yeah, sure. So the 3D is there already. So 2D and 3D is just a matter of implementation again, right? So it's very easy for someone that is good at web development, so not me, from front-end design, to make this into, 3D instead of a 2D, and render it and have shades and all these things that designers like, right? To look a bit nicer, and maybe even like. So that should be easy. So the other extensions that we're thinking about and we're working at very close is some things are already possible. They're just not on the UI. So for example, you can have multiple continuations. So you can have like we said, access to the multiverse. You can generate 5 instead of 1. And then select which one you like and give that signal to the model. You can have mutation. Actually, it's a very interesting approach. You can mutate or change designs through language, and that's very interesting. So you can already, instead of saying I want this 3-bedroom house, you can say I want this 3-bedroom house, and then give it 1-2 rooms as an input. So that's another extension that already works. It's just not on the UI. The designer can actually draw a couple of inputs. So this is the dining room and this is the kitchen. I want them to be here, right? And then they can press the button and the model can continuate from there. So that's also one thing that works. And then the other extensions are, use the same approach to put furniture inside. Using the approach that I just mentioned of prefixing, in a way, that's how they call it in language models, performance. So telling the model that I want this type of performance and generate a design. So that will be when we get to daylight and comfort and all these things. Of course, there will be the option of people just clicking a button and getting a daylight map on the output if they want to. But there will also be the option of, I want a 3-bedroom house with very good daylight in the bedrooms or something like that. And then the model should be able to generate something. So that's a step that comes later. I've talked about this in some of my talks. It's I'm not sure it's going to work. It's another gamble in a way. It's another leap of faith with something called decision transformer. So, but yeah, that's another continuation. And maybe the final continuations that are being worked on and they're always in my mind is, that this is not just meant for architectural design. Like I said, we've made game maps with this. We've made like a 2D platform, not platformers, sorry, 2D dungeon crawlers, right? And you can make game maps with a lot of really interesting stuff. The number of rooms, the difficulty of opponents, and everything, So this probably is not shocking, but, other industries of design are much bigger than architecture in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least much bigger in terms of market and
revenue.
So gaming is one of them. And that gaming is actually, a lot of people, like I understood this quite late, that gaming is bigger than all the other entertainment industries combined, which is crazy. And so this can definitely be used for gaming, right? And imagine now if someone can, just type a sentence and get a game in Unity or real, right? And then they can work on from there. So those are other extensions that are interesting, like in other domains. And those are mostly because of my curiosity, right? Just to see if it works. Like even like, web layouts or I don't know, document layouts for, design, all these things. But yeah, those are the steps, the next steps. Oh, yeah, the last one I forgot, sorry, it's also the generative design. So at one point, the UI will have a sort of button of like, generative design, explore, something like that. And at that point, it will take maybe a couple of hours. And after that, you get some visualization.
As a data point on the gaming thing, I think I heard, and this could be totally incorrect, so take it for what it's worth, but on Apple's platform, which is not even known as a gaming platform, the iOS devices, the gaming, I think I heard the gaming category in the App Store is something like 10 times the revenue of everything else, just to give a perspective on that. So it's incredible. And to think about the potential training opportunities that exist there compared to what we have as far as data goes as architects is just monumental in so much bigger than what we can provide. That's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you earlier about the training is because, there's the idea of the data sets that exist out there, but there's also the realization that there's a lot of missing pieces. There are a lot of gaps in that data. There's a lot of qualitative gaps. There's a lot of underrepresentation, things like that. And so using these data sources as training for these AI systems, I mean, it seems to me like there's potential problematic outcomes there. How are you guys addressing that, or is there a way to address that? Again, like thinking about the amount of data that we actually have to work with, it doesn't seem like there is enough.
No. That's a very interesting topic. I like another one I like to be critical about. Like, it's very interesting. We find ourselves in a almost like funny predicament. Like, of course, we don't have an open source data set in the AC. We don't have the designer's ImageNet, right? It doesn't exist. And it doesn't seem that any party is willing to share any sort of data, right? Up to now, right? At least to my knowledge. At the same time, ironically, no party has enough data to do anything useful. Just literally the largest architecture and engineering company in the world has a speck of what is needed. Like, they just don't have. So the only way to do it would be to come together, as the AC community and make a common data set that everyone can use, right? And that's not going to happen. So we need our ImageNet, or, we need our data sets. There are much more things than ImageNet now, but we don't have. You're absolutely right that if we start doing this, there is going to be a big bias. And that bias will be a problem, right? Because, as I said before, the goal for me, like as I see AI's future in design, is to completely break down all this stuff, right? Not to propagate the biases that we have. And in fact, is to create new intuitions, not to propagate those intuitions. And if we just take the data we have and we train a model, 100% guaranteed all these biases will go through. The model will pick up on them. They are very good at that, right? It will pick up on every single thing that we have, been biased so far. So that would be a problem. And it's actually an interesting problem to deal with, like as we put this into practice. And it's very important to remember. And this is like design biases, right? Then we need to think of like human bias in the sense like occupant influence. Again, we need to care about who we are designing. I was in so many meetings at my consultancy work before where people never even thought about who they were designing. They were just talking about, materials and how much this is and how does it connect. Like, so we need to think about people. And that's another bias that it's there and it's not even visible to us anymore. But these models, we will take it and empower it even more. Like, if we are building offices that make the life miserable of people, and we use that data set and train a model, then that model will make offices that makes life miserable. Like, right? So all these things is very important to think of. A way to solve it, like I don't have a good way to solve it. I'm going to work like everyone on it. But I think one nice way is this exploration that I said. So there are, like, for example, I do believe quality diversity, like a truly powerful exploration without bias, can help you generate the type of data that might allow a model, right, to see more than this narrow view that we have. And yeah, I think that is a very, very good approach because it has two benefits. One, it will give you a data set that you can use, right? If you are good enough at engineering it, you will get a lot of valid designs that, okay, we have a data set now. And two, it will also give you some invalid, some interesting, some cool and weird stuff, some other things that can help the model learn how to generate new things. So yeah, this is how I would fight it in a way, with synthetic data generation, which thankfully for our industry is not very difficult. And in the sense that at the level, I think, at least where I think these methods, and I always think of them at conceptual design, right? I haven't talked about detailed design or implementation or construction at all here. It's conceptual design. I think it's quite easy to generate synthetic data if you put your mind to it. So I think that's how I would fight it. But it's a big problem. I agree. It's a big problem because, we will just, propagate everything we do wrong if we don't take care of it.
One of the things that you show in the generator right now is you have an image that shows useful daylight data, daylight autonomy, sun hours. So it seems to me like there's an implicit orientation and location involved. I assume that that's part of maybe something that's just not exposed right now in the interface. But how do you plan on, because location matters, right? When it comes to real buildings in the real world, these are the kinds of things that have a direct implication on the comfort of the design that it's spitting out. So how do you address that, or how will you address that?
Yeah, so this relates to the Oracle model. So the ones that will work side by side with ArchiText. And there are two ways. So there are some metrics that are not dependent on location. So for example, if you're doing wind comfort, you're okay. You just need wind velocities, and you can do it. If you're doing natural ventilation on apartments, you're not dependent on location, just orientation. And the other metrics, like you said, sun hours, sunlight hours, thermal comfort, solar radiation, glare, daylight, they're all context specific. So there's no way around having a model for its location. That's kind of, at least in the beginning, right? In the beginning, you would need a model for its location. And perhaps in the future, if you do all the locations, you have all this data across every location, you can train one model to rule them all in a way that, again, has the location as a prefix, right? And then, it's okay. You just say, give me a good daylight apartment in New York, and then it will give you one from the data. So that's how it would work, yeah. Of course, you have to take in account that location and orientation.
I really like the approach when it comes to the comfort of people who will eventually occupy this as a building. So, and the reason I asked about, where your vision was going in the future is because it becomes incredibly important to be able to communicate that with the people who it's ultimately for. So does this all happen in the browser? Is that how you see it kind of working, so that anybody from anywhere can access this and then therefore point at it and talk about it and communicate somehow how comfort translates from this design to them?
Yeah, ideally, yes. Like, if it were up to me, I wouldn't mind if the platform was almost as simple as it is today. Like, I know that these things begin like this, and then you start becoming a design tool, and then all of a sudden you have like all these grid lines and, I don't know, like different layers and different families and all this stuff. Like, I don't know if it will ever reach there, but I wouldn't mind if it never did. I wouldn't mind if it was a tool that, like you said, everyone can use, even as an education tool, right? Even because all this was inspired by a lot what I saw in KL, right? KL is a city that, Kuala Lumpur, is a city that has incredible development. Like, if I look around my house, even now, after 2 years of COVID, there's like 20 construction sites, right? And everyone buys, I don't know if this is the same in the US, please let me know. Everyone buys something here by looking at renders, that's it. So they buy it 5 years before, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, we know the problem with renders. They're all lying.
They're fiction, yeah.
And yeah, they're all fiction, like it's nothing. So everything gets value engineered. And at the end of the day, like, not only it's the fact that they're lying, but the consumer, like I've seen it here, and I'm not blaming them. They don't know anything, right? They don't understand if this is a good place or a bad place. They just see which render looks nicer, right? And I wouldn't mind if architects was just that, a way to educate billions of people that will buy and habitate, is that a word? Billions of houses, right? And if a fraction of those people, had a say after they see how things affect, and they told, and they decided to buy something because it didn't have, full height windows in the bedroom, I will be happy, And so even if that happens, and so yeah, it has to be simple. It has to be simple because I think the impact you have at that point of the design is much larger than if it was a tool that an architect or a designer could use to, make detailed drawings for construction. So yeah.
What you're talking about are the kinds of decisions that are made early and have the biggest impact. Yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely the case with architecture. Everybody knows that saving a big problem for later is going to cost more. So you're right. This is the kind of thing that needs to be kind of implemented at the earliest stages of design, so that they can have the most positive impact.
Exactly. The only problem with this is that, at least to my understanding, that's not where the money is at.
Right.
Conceptual design is, in my projects here, conceptual design, if I was lucky as an environmental designer and not part of the architect, right? If I was lucky, it was 3 months, right? I imagine the architects did 4 or 5 months before that. And after that, it was done. It's just detailed design, documentation, design reviews, all the stuff that, I'll be honest, I never really liked, but, they are important. But that was it. So all the money, and of course, 5 years of construction, right? So it's not easy. I understand why people are not doing it. I understand why people are doing, BIM platforms, for example. A lot of money is there, right? A lot of chunk of the money of the project is there. So if you want your platform to actually make profit, if you want to make money through your work, it's important. But I think that these tools, architects, ideally, if you give it at a different scale, then you change how you interact with people. So if you give it to millions of people, right? And they can use it just to educate, as I said.
The crazy thing is that conceptual design, I think, oftentimes is free. And like you said, it's when the most important decisions are actually made. It does not seem difficult for architecture as a profession to flip the script on what conceptual design and the value of it actually is, because it is very interesting to me to see firms competing on drafting, basically. And the crazy thing is, if you asked a contractor to build a BIM model, they're going to do it better because, and this is generalizing, but they're actually the ones installing the parts and they know how it goes together. And they're not going to look at your drawings anyway, as an architect, as far as, details go, because we get that all the time. How should I put this together? It's well, first of all, you already know how you're going to put it together, and it's in the drawings, which you didn't look at. So it's very interesting to me to see architects vying to compete in the drafting of the building when their value is not there at all. That is a drafting service.
It's an issue, and I think a lot of changes will happen in the profession very soon. Whoever manages to shift, flip that script, as you said, because in a way, architects should not be really. It probably is because I was interested in making it, but it shouldn't be the first application of AI in design. What you just described is very good target for AI. Let's automate reporting, let's automate drafting, let's automate reviewing. And I'm sure people are working on it. And I can tell you from my experience, I think it's 100% possible. Right now, there are models out there you can download and fine tune and try and do it. So hopefully someone does it well, and then we can focus on what is important, which is design.
Yeah. Well, Theodoros, this was a fantastic conversation. I'll definitely include a link to ArchiText. Is there anybody, and that just comes out as architect, but it's not. It's ArchiText with a T at the end of that .design. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But where else can people follow along with what you and your partner at ArchiText have been up to?
Yeah, so the site and the mailing list hopefully soon will have a lot of updates and what we're working on. You can follow me on social media like LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you're interested in AI, I highly recommend the Illustre AI Discord is open, and you can always check all the interesting things people are discussing. All the state-of-the-art things are happening in there. So yeah, I think those are nice places. And also, thank you very much for the invitation. It was brilliant. It's amazing to discuss these things.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll have all the links for everything that was just mentioned in the show notes for this episode. And Theodoros, until next time.
Thank you. See you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Troxel Podcast, and once again, I would like to thank ArchIT for sponsoring this episode. Visit their website at getarchit, that's GETARCHIT.com. Thank you to Avail for their support of this podcast episode. Visit getavail.com to see their holistic approach to content management today. Thanks to NCARB for their support of this podcast episode. Visit ncarb.org/AOP and contribute to the Analysis of Practice survey today. This show is part of the Gabled Media Podcast Network. You can see all the shows at gabledmedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. You can help support what I'm doing here by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out, and of course, share it with your friends. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment on the website at trxl.co/podcast, where you can find every episode. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Just search for eTroxel. Talk to you soon.